Okay, good morning everyone. We have with us today Satyan Gajwani from Times Internet. Satyan, both InfoEdge and Times have been around for a long time. We are of course only 12 years old, but you guys have been in business for 30, 40, I don't know how many years now.
175.
But you are the new guy at Times Internet and you are changing a lot of things. So tell us a little bit about what's happening at Times Internet now.
Sure. So I took over as CEO of Times Internet about 6 months ago. I've been working with the company for the last few years unofficially. Without going too much into it, I think there's three basic things that are changing for us. We've been fortunate enough to have the leeway to make some pretty dramatic changes. First is, I think as a company, we've really been a little too content and media centric. And today we're shifting ourselves to being a lot more product and technology centric. So like I'm a computer science major from the US, and so I kind of like that more. And I think as a company, we're shifting our focus a lot more towards making sure that we have really good products and really good technology building rather than necessarily having a really pretty face in front of everything. The second thing that we're doing is we're structuring ourselves a lot more like small companies. And so we've gone through a number of different iterations, I think, in the past 10, 12 years. The thing that, essentially this panel is about why large companies are good places for entrepreneurship. I would challenge it a little bit and basically say large companies are really bad traditionally for entrepreneurship because they force you to align with some big corporate vision and lots of problems. So the solution for us was to not be a big company. And so officially I'm a CEO of Times Internet, but if you ask anybody in the company, the way we're really operating more than anything is that each business has its own effective CEO, and I basically get to talk to them about the fun stuff that they're doing. And I think that's the only way for us to potentially succeed going forward, because when small startups that were small 12 years ago called Naukri.com show up and were little fish and we were the big fish on the scene, they were really fast and nimble and knew their businesses well and had great management and great ownership. And today, is the largest job property in India amongst many other things. And so for us as a company, we really value, I think today more than ever before, small business setups. And then the third thing that we're doing is actually structurally trying to make ourselves more like a collective of companies rather than one big company. So, organizationally we have these changes, but we're actually thinking about separating them sometimes into separate entities and looking at them potentially having their own fates. Right. I think the problem with starting a business just completely on your own today is that the Indian ecosystem, both in terms of users and investors, doesn't necessarily support a lot of experimentation. With a big company, I think you'll have a little more leeway to sort of try things out. And so for us, we like to try new ideas. And if that idea has some legs behind it and can potentially become a really big business, essentially I want to stay the hell out of its way, right? It should basically have its own management that believes in it, that own it, that feel a sense of ownership over it, that have the autonomy to drive its strategic focus and then really just take it forward.
2 or 3 interesting points you made out there. Now, if I just rewind to about 10 years ago when we were a small company and we were competing with Times of India, there was a total confusion for a long time about whether the print business and the internet business should be one or whether they should be 2 separate companies. And that got resolved after a while. But in the process, valuable time was lost.
Yeah, definitely.
If I look at InfoEdge today, we have some of the issues you have. We are trying to do a lot of businesses inside the company. We are building 99 acres. We're building Shiksha. We're building Jeevan Sathi. We are also investing in startups outside. One of the issues which we encounter, and you did sort of allude to it, is that you need to incentivize people differently. You need to sort of motivate people differently. You need to develop a sense of ownership. You need to different businesses have different requirements. A mature business may want to work 5 days a week, while a startup inside the company may want to work 7 days a week. So how do you sort of address this piece, the differential nature of policies you need to have inside the company without antagonizing people inside the company?
No, absolutely. I mean, so let me just first get to the first point about the whole print internet side, right? So Times Internet today is a separate company. I'm the CEO. Operationally, we have very, very few linkages with Times of India and Bennett Coleman. I mean, we have them where it makes sense and where we can create some value because of it. But organizationally, the Times Internet team is a collective of internet professionals that are running that business much more than, they don't really have any association with the print business per se, today at least. So the first problem of print having its own, let's say HR practices and things like that, and internet having its own, that's at least somewhat resolved because they're completely separate companies, so they really don't affect each other that way. But even in Times Internet, I would argue that the people who are running timesofIndia.com are running a totally different business from the people running Ghana.com, right? So Times of India has a top line, it's going for some growth, it's got a leadership position, it's going to keep growing, yada, yada. Ghana.com is a startup, right? It's in a music space, it's doing pretty well on web, we haven't launched on mobile yet, but it's very much at a much earlier level of maturity. Correlatedly, the risk profile associated with building Ghana is very different from the risk profile of building TOI. And so you create different structures for different people. And I think, I don't know, at the end of the day, people always have issues if there's different things in the system, but you just do what's right for the company, right? So if someone is able, if the person who's running Ghana is able to make it like a leadership position and create a viable business out of it, that's a really impressive feat. And that's essentially building a startup from the ground up. Whereas, taking Times of India to a new level, that's, there's a great opportunity and work there, but I mean, there's some prior weight and value that came into making that get there. So I think it's a little bit nuanced, and you work on it with different situations, but I mean, people should understand there are different risk profiles and different risk appetites and correlatedly different incentive structures.
And how do you sort of reward people in startups inside the company? Because you're not a listed company.
Yeah.
You can't give stock. So how do you sort of incentivize people to stay there for the long run?
Yeah, but see,
ownership is one piece, but what about rewards?
Yeah, so there's different situations. So for example, we just bought this company last week called Men's XP. It's a small startup in the men's lifestyle content space. Ironically, it's in the content space, but it's a good business nonetheless. So the CEO is this guy, Angad Bhatia, and he had taken it to a certain level in what he's done so far. Now, we know we're going to put some of our resources behind it, and that's why it made sense for us to acquire it, because he's built a certain brand and certain traction, but with some of the resources we have, we can do more with it. But it is still very much a startup in the way it's operating, right? It's got some targets that are way, way higher. So what we've essentially done is said, we've bought the company for something, but if our goal is to buy the company and then pay you a salary, we know that's never going to work, right? Because you've been driven by sort of an entrepreneurial passion. So we have to create an incentive structure that makes your salary not relevant, right? So your salary is what gets you day to day beyond what you're doing, but the target has to be something really aggressive and achievable. It's not like 20–30% growth, which is kind of standard, right? It has to be, can you take this business from X to 20X, right? And if you're able to do that, then you should participate on the upside of what you're able to create. So
how do you give that upside structurally? Is it all sort of cash, or is it because there's no stock, right?
I mean, yeah, you could do it through cash. So it depends on different businesses, right? So Men's XP is an awesome business, but it's never going to be big enough to IPO. Like, let's be very honest, it's a one site, right? And it can grow into be many more sites, it can grow, but at least today that vision isn't necessarily there. So the idea of giving equity is probably counterintuitive because it wouldn't make sense there. But say something like Ghana. Ghana has this potential, and Box TV, it's this video service we launched. These businesses have potential to become underlying platforms behind very core parts of Indian consumer entertainment. Right? If you presume that someday there's big connectivity and there's fast internet and all that, if Ghana is successful, it can become an underlying platform of music consumption. That's a really big vision. So in that situation, you may say an equity orientation or giving equity in that business may be something you look at, rather than, so it depends on each business, really, more than anything.
Got it. Okay.
See, at the end of the day, creating ownership is not about money, actually, right? You can do the money part, you manage it as you need to. Ownership comes from two things. It's autonomy. It's the ability to say, I have ownership over the decisions that affect and grow this business. And it's some element of participation in the value that I create. Now, if you can do something to do both of those, I think you've mirrored a lot of the benefits of entrepreneurship. And to be very honest, most big companies have been really bad at this, right? They suck at ownership and participation. And so that's why the whole spur of entrepreneurship is so exciting. But big companies will get smarter, will do a better job with it, and create structures that are more enticing, that mirror some of those reward aspects.
Sure. We've been investing in a few companies outside. So in the last 3 years, we made about 7 or 8 investments, and some of these investing companies are now doing very well. We started as minority investors in almost all these companies. And in some companies, we are at 45%, in some companies, we are at 30%. We don't mind going to majority in these companies if the entrepreneurs want it. So so you have been investing as Times as well.
Yeah, we've dabbled in investing a lot more in the last few years in a lot of different ways. So we've got T Labs, which is an incubator, which finds smart people with an idea, gives them a little bit of money and some space to spend 6 months building out a prototype, and if it works, it grows. So we have about 10, 20 companies in that realm. And then we've got about 5 or 7 or 8, somewhere between 5 and 10 investments for minority stakes.
This is through the Times treaties?
No. These are cash deals. Yeah.
Oh, these are cash
That's
deals.
a separate business.
That's
a Bennett thing, right? So
okay.
these are investments that had either some strategic value or we just thought they were doing something really smart and we learned from them. And so we've taken minority stakes in some businesses. There's new models we're looking at.
Which are some of these companies which you've taken?
So I don't know how many of them are all public, but let's see. Delivery, that's one that we did about 6 months ago. It's an e-commerce logistics company that's killing it, doing really well. Blanking right now. There's a couple where we're about.
But you've actually put in cash because earlier what I remember.
These are all cash. These are all cash.
These are all cash. Not sort of prioritizing or.
Yeah. No, that's a different model.
That's a different.
That one has its own portfolio of companies, but this is a different model.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
But honestly, we don't have a structured fund. We don't have like an X amount committed. We don't have like necessarily like a fund manager per se. We're kind of opportunistic about it, right? So Men's XP, the model that made sense for us was to acquire, not to necessarily invest. We obviously acquired and then invested. There's some businesses where we think they're just doing a really good job and we want to be sort of a small investor alongside and just participate and then help out however we can. It really depends. Generally, like pure financial investments are not really our thing because we're just not as good at them as other people, right? So you'd go to a really smart, savvy venture capitalist to do that probably. So ones where we can add some value or where there's some linkage to resources we've got or there's something we can do or some way we know that you're really good, then generally those are the ones we look at.
Yeah, so smart companies today have many options, right? There are a lot of VCs out there who are sort of willing to fund them. So why should they come to you?
So first of all, I don't agree with that. I think most venture capital today, like 80% of it's gone into e-commerce in the last year, and that's cool, but we all know that's kind of a saturated sector, and we know it's all blowing up now, and blah, blah, blah. I actually don't think necessarily venture capitalists in India, and rightfully so, are able to take the risk appetite to try new things, right? And there's a few reasons for that. One is there are not that many buyers of companies after they've raised venture capital. So there's this huge set, and like today you see it, there are these huge set of internet companies that are officially worth like $100 million, but they're not big enough to IPO, and they're too big for anybody to necessarily say they want to buy into them. And so what happens is the venture capital model forces itself today to invest in something that can only potentially IPO really right now. So they're just pretty conservative, I think, in general about what they're willing to bet on. Whereas for us, if we invest into an idea that creates a really successful business worth 50 or 100 or some amount of money, that's fine, right? Because we're not driven by some specific ROI and things like that. So the businesses that I think we're better as an investor in are ones where we have some sort of operating relationship today. So we have a validation of the quality and the work that's being done. That's like Delivery is today probably one of the most successful startups in e-commerce logistics. And we know it because we worked with them for so long and we really like them. That's why it started, right? There are a couple others like that. And then there are ones where there would be some value in a relationship with content or with media or with the base of users we've got, whatever it is, where it makes sense to look at a relationship that way.
Okay, so wherever you can add a little bit of value, and where sort of not every company in India is going to sort of make it to IPO. So VCs have a shorter horizon; they probably invest for 5 or 7 years, while companies like Times Internet and even
like Naukri. How long? I mean, Naukri would have taken.
So
would have taken
exactly. So it doesn't. Normally it takes about at least 10 years to build a large company in India, which is IPOable, and most VCs tend to have a 5 to 7 year horizon. So we also one of the things sort of we tell our investee companies is that we are strategic, but we have a long term view. We are not going to push you to do anything stupid or just because your business has not scaled in 3 years or 5 years. And that's one reason why people like us and they come to us as well. So that's a fair point.
And I think that's the problem is that like these businesses that are in purgatory, right, like that are officially worth something, there's an investor pressure to do something, and that's not always good for the business.
Okay, let me sort of also spend some time on businesses which are starting inside the company.
Sure.
Right? So there aren't too many case studies or successful case studies of businesses being starting inside the company,
especially in
and making it really big.
Especially in the internet space.
Especially in the internet space. Of course, there are a few. Google has done some stuff, and Amazon has been successful.
Well, most of what Google's done, they bought actually. If you think about it, right?
Yeah.
They bought Android. They bought
YouTube.
Yeah, that one worked. Yeah. But they bought a lot of the things. There's a couple of them that they've built, but a lot of them have been.
Even to buy and make them work is not easy.
Yeah, but like I think Gmail was one of the few things they built.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. Most of the things you have to buy and then actually figure out how they work after, yeah.
So tell me, which are the businesses which you've started inside the company, which are now sort of becoming big or getting there?
I think, I mean, the cool thing about what we're doing today is, so we've got, let's say, TOI, Economic Times, India Times, which are sort of your mature content businesses relatively, although India Times is changing a lot. But let's say these are relatively mature. Then you've got a couple of commerce-oriented businesses like India Times Shopping, Times Deal, which is not really commerce, it's whatever, it's something different, but in that space. Times City is a local play. And then we've got a couple of entertainment things that we're working on, like Ghana and Box TV. And then we've got like 5 other ideas that are sort of experiments / too early to define them and say exactly where they are. So we've got very, very different maturity businesses internally today, right? So, and I think the cool thing is if you're interested in running a business or starting a business today for us, depending on your level of comfort or risk appetite or willingness to try something new versus something that's already gotten some element of proof, there are a lot of different options with us today. So the ones that I think are exciting today that are sort of on the cusp of having proven something, but not necessarily proven a lot, I would say Ghana, that's probably one of them. India Times Shopping is in the shopping space, so we'll leave that for another time because you guys have heard enough about commerce, or you will if you haven't. Box TV. Box TV is in the premium video space, and that hasn't even officially launched, but it's weird that I would say that that's a business that already has a really positive trajectory despite having not fully launched, and you'll hear more about that in the coming weeks. And then I think Times City has some work to do, but it's sort of, it's gaining a lot of traction in the local space. These are kind of the 4 or 5 that are really interesting right now, I think.
That's a lot of work, right, for you?
No, I don't do anything. What is the best part? I get to just hang out and come speak at these things and, cheerlead, basically. I'm basically a cheerleader, right? Like, these guys do everything, and I get to say, look at how awesome.
Well, what is your biggest pain point, right?
My biggest
Where do you end up spending your time?
Conferences. I'm just kidding. The problem is there's so many things. I think the biggest challenge is filtering.
Filtering.
Right? Because it's so easy to look at like 100 ideas. And for me, I think if we build the right systems, we can look at like 10, 20, 30 ideas by essentially setting them up, right? So you put a good lead in, get a pitch together, put some money behind that pitch, and then let them run. That's scalable in some sense, but it's not scalable to like 100, right? And then I think the other thing is, so rather than completely being separate companies, right, which you could do, right? We could say these are all separate entities and they have no owner, then I'm not a CEO, right? I'm just a board member, let's say. The one advantage of the big company, Times Internet, which again, we minimize this, but there is a huge advantage to it, is there's a lot of learnings, right? So for example, for InfoEdge, they know how to manage sales teams better than anybody. And that's why today when they look at new businesses like Zomato, they've figured out how to use some of the learnings that are there and transfer them across businesses. For us, there's a lot of learnings we've developed in just the last 10 years. I mean, I've learned a ton in the last few years here. And when you bring in a new team, so like Unga, then Men's XP, there's a lot of things he wants to try, and we know what will work and won't work in some of those spaces, right? And so we generally like to experiment, but there's a learning that comes, whether it's marketing or sales or whatever. There's a lot of different things, like SEO, right? It's a stupid tactical thing. But we know SEO really, really well, to the point where any of our businesses can really leverage that skill set well. And this is a small tactical one, but there's a lot of them. So I think the biggest challenge is how do you create ownership and drive and entrepreneurialism and autonomy and whatnot while still like leveraging the learnings and the skill sets of people who have learned across businesses, right? I hate the word synergy. I think it's BS half of the time, and it kills ownership. But there is some value in learnings. And so if you can figure out how to create transfer of learnings while still autonomy, I think that's the real challenge.
So you have a separate product team, a separate engineering team, a separate sort of sales team?
So like infrastructure is shared because that's just, it's a lot easier if everyone can.
So same office, same sort of admin.
But like even tech, like servers, like we have a private cloud, right? That's shared across our businesses. But every team has their own development, product, design, UX. We're figuring out how to verticalize in that sense, to some sense. So that they have, nobody should have an excuse, right? They should be able to say, I had this and I have to drive this. Can't be like I was waiting for him to send that and this didn't come in time, so.
Yes.
Thanks Satyan. Thanks for being here.